Hey, hi everybody. Thanks for listening. So that was recorded. This is live. So I'm gonna do a Q&A for about half an hour. I have a bunch of questions already from Twitter and from the platform. I'll try to get to what I can. So thanks for listening and thanks for being here for the Q&A. Let's see. Someone asked about cars, about software updates and the difficulty of doing that, and asked, can companies provide legacy support? So this is hard. I mean, legacy support is actually legit hard, right? Microsoft, Apple depreciate operating systems after a decade because providing support for the older stuff is difficult. So I don't know how realistic it is to expect a company to provide a test bed for, I don't know, let's say 20 cars times 30 model years, right? That's 600 different vehicles to test a software update. I mean, something's going to have to be done, but that is something that we in the computer field don't know how to do yet. Right? We cannot keep that kind of legacy stuff working for consumers. At the business level, we do it. I mean, there are ancient systems being run at corporate data centers, but at the consumer level, we don't know how, and that's something we have to figure out. I don't have a good answer. Somebody asked about, is there solely responsibility of government to create with policy generations, or can companies do this? So, I mean, a problem I have here really is market failure. Right? Companies are designed for near-term profit. They're not designed for societal benefit. And figuring out how to get the incentives right is really difficult. And there's definitely a role for government, and it's a role we haven't seen really fulfilled very well in the past several decades. So, it's not a matter of too much government. It's like getting government in there in the first place. I think we are missing the oversight role of government to create the playing field. And then corporations can be on top of that. But it's not the role of a for-profit entity to decide what's best for society, right? They decide what's best for them, and if we're lucky, society is okay with it. There's a question about computer literacy increasing. It's interesting that computer literacy is less technological literacy and more social literacy. So definitely there's more literacy around, this object, but it's not about how it works inside. It's about using it. It's about integrating it in our lives. So I think literacy is important, and a more literate government, right? A younger generation will be able to understand these issues more than an older generation does. But I'm not sure a literacy really helps that much. I mean, it helps some in the policy making because you know what's going on. My father was a judge and he didn't understand tech and made it very hard for him to make rulings about tech. So that's going to be better. But I think you need more than literacy. Do I think companies should be compelled by law to support security updates? Certainly we need something, right? There is no other area of consumer law where the company is allowed to say, well, what the hell? It either works or it doesn't, not our problem. So whether it's enforcing security updates or something, I think software vendors need to be liable for their products just in the same way that everyone else is. And the form that takes is probably something the companies can figure out, but they have to be responsible. And I think losing that responsibility is in some ways putting us in the mess we're in today. You'll see my glasses come on and off as I read questions. In what area could the next GDPR big style event? I think it's going to be somewhere in AI. Right? Artificial intelligence is kind of the next thing, and regulating that is a huge issue and problem and something we need to figure out. So I think the next big thing, the next big law is going to be somewhere around AI safety, AI fairness, AI equity, AI accessibility, AI explainability, somewhere in that space. And the EU is currently working on this. So like GDPR, you're probably going to see regulations coming out of Europe before any other country. And Europe is the regulatory superpower on the planet, and that's what they do. So I think AI is the place to look for that. How do we best educate older generations? I have no idea. Good luck. I've been trying to educate older generations for a long time. It's hard, and a lot of this stuff is intuitive, so I don't have any good answers. But yes, I mean, certainly as these technologies get integrated into our lives, whether it's medical devices or cars or home consumer goods, or how we access goods and services on the internet, there's definitely a generation gap, and fixing that feels important. I don't know if there's any way to do it explicitly. I mean, we're not going to have classes in computer literacy. It's just people aren't going to take them. It's going to be stuff they figure out. I mean, the problem largely, I think, is these products and services work against users. Right? Google's not on your side. Google's on their side. So they're not going to, there's going to be a mismatch. And education is often learning how to work around what these companies and platforms want you to do. So I think that's where you're going to see useful movement, and raw education is not going to be our vector. We notice anything change? The question about companies and large fines. It's interesting. In the United States, fines tend to be rounding errors. Right? The fines are never enough to make companies notice. Europe is starting to change that. Right? Europe is fining companies amounts that matter. Question was, are we noticing any changes based on it? I don't think so yet, but it's still early. Apple's going to have to change their unique power connector to UBCC because the EU has required that. They don't want to do it, but they're going to do it. That's probably a good thing. Meta has been fined an enormous amount of money. And are they changing behavior? I'm not in Europe, so I don't see the European change, but it's not changing their business model yet. And I am optimistic that fines like this are a way to push companies to do things that society wants that aren't in their short-term financial interests. So it's the stick we have, but I don't know how much it's actually worked yet. Is there any way to secure the internet given what we have? I don't know. I mean, the internet's pretty secure. I mean, there are two things that are true. One, that the internet is horribly insecure, and the other is it's working pretty okay. And both of those are true at the same time. And that really speaks to the way we as society do these things. We kind of muddle through. We have incremental improvements. The systems aren't that great. They get better. There are problems. We just get by. And that's likely what we're going to have in the internet for the foreseeable future. Right? It's largely secure. I am on this platform and it's working. Nobody has jumped in and disrupted it. I'm going to get on an airplane later today. I'm going to check in on my phone and it's going to work. And I'll be able to use my credit card. I mean, all that stuff basically works. So you can look at the insecurity, or you can look at the security, the fact that it's all working. I don't think there'll be any sea change making it more secure at an appreciable level anytime soon. I think this muddling through is where we are and what we have. Is it even technically possible that IoT connections can be both secure and not require manual connection? See, again, this is back to definition. What do you mean by secure? I have an IoT device. I have a thermostat. It's pretty good. Now, was that a manual connection? I guess I had to push a button to pair it, but that's okay. I don't mind. I mean, again, largely these things will work pretty well most of the time. I tried to get an interconnected door lock, and that was actually a disaster. So that didn't work. But I don't think that was the protocol. I think that was just the company was lousy. So that's our world. And the real question to me is, what are the limits of the IoT? What are the limits of what we're going to connect? Are we going to put our uh, our toys and our coffee pots online, and where do we draw the limit of what is in the IoT and what isn't? I mean, stuff is going on there, and you try to buy a car today, you can't get one that is not internet connected, whether you want it or not. And if you turn the connection off, it actually is still turned on. So, I mean, this to me is the problem, and it's our world. And things will be, kind of secure. Again, against who? Criminals, foreign governments is going to be very different. So the question is am I more or less optimistic and hopeful? So if you listen to me, I am basically optimistic. I tend to be near-term pessimistic, long-term optimistic. Like, I don't think this is the thing that's going to destroy our species. We'll figure it out. And our species is good at figuring it out. It takes a while, it takes decades, we muddle through, there are problems, but in the end, we figure it out more or less. And I think that's what we're going to have here. I am not a doomsayer. I don't think this is going to be a disaster. There will be little disasters, as there always are in everything, but we will figure it out. And in the scheme of sort of disasters that we have to worry about as a species, this is kind of medium on the list. It's not low, but it's not high. But it could get worse as these systems become more critical. I mean, that's the thing to watch, how these systems integrate into our lives, into society, into culture, into government, into economics, where they become critical. Why is it proving very hard to shift the narrative around individual and civil liberties and safety? Because, as the questioner asked, it's being treated like a zero-sum game. That there are some very powerful interests arrayed against privacy, against security. Right? National governments like to be able to eavesdrop on people. And depending on the government, it's for crime prevention or social control. But this ability to invade people's privacy is something that governments like. At the same time, you have surveillance as the business model of the internet. So invading people's privacy is something that corporations like. So together, you kind of have this public-private surveillance partnership that is all working against civil liberties, privacy, and in the end, security. So that's the counter narrative. And that's why you hear the zero sum. Like, do you want security or do you want privacy? It's actually kind of nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. There's no security without privacy. There's no privacy without security. But it's being treated as zero sum, right? That if we give you privacy, the criminals and terrorists get privacy and we all die. Right? That's the narrative. It's not true. It makes no sense. It's never been true. But it's a pervasive narrative, and it's hard for lawmakers to get beyond it. Because, especially in a democracy, a tough on crime platform is something that resonates with people, with non-technical people who don't understand the nuances. And that makes this, I think, very hard. And it's this battle we've been fighting really since the mid-90s, the early 90s. This tension between security and privacy. Questions about smart cities. So this is, we've said something about that, in this Q&A sort of here and there, right? A smart city is kind of jargon for internet connected everything. So internet connected city services, ranging from traffic lights to, the way emergency vehicles are dispatched. I guess those are already on the internet. Well, sort of everything. And yes, the more we put on the internet, the more we risk catastrophic failure. But how is that different from the power grid and catastrophic failure resulting from blackout? Even without a smart city, you're going to have a powered city. We have powered cities for decades. So is the incremental risk really that different? And that's what's worth thinking about, because there's a lot of benefit for putting lots of services together on networks in a way that is smart, or at least adaptive to real-time needs. That has value. So it has risk and it has value. And the way to solve all of these is through distributed systems. And the way we solve the risks of power outages is to have localized power generation. The more local it is, the smaller any outage is, and the less it can affect large swaths of a country or a continent. And it's the same with internet connected systems. Can we make them distributed in a way that failures don't cascade and become massive failures? So there are ways to architect this for better or for worse. And again, this is not something that a for-profit corporation will do. They will architect it for minimal cost, maximal profit, which is not what we would want as a resident of a city. And we would want it architected for maximal reliability and, I guess, low cost. It's going to have questions about trust and how we're designing our systems that we need to trust everyone. So I wrote a book on trust in 2014. It's called Liars and Outliers. And it's actually a very interesting and complicated question of how we trust. And it's not just technology. The world is designed, so we have to trust everybody. Right? I'm going to go on an airplane this afternoon. So let's count it up. I'm going to get in the car of a stranger and trust them to take me to the airport. I'm going to trust every other driver on the road not to collide with me. I'm going to trust hundreds, thousands of people, strangers at the airport, not to attack me. I'm going to trust a pilot, another person I've never met, to fly me where I'm going. And actually, I'm trusting the airline that has a system to put qualified and well-rested pilots and airplanes on schedule. I'm going to trust the food I'm going to eat at the airport, right? A huge amount of trust. Right? Food safety from where the food is grown or farmed all the way to where it's prepared and served to me. So probably hundreds of thousands of people there. I mean, I can go on and on. And I haven't done any tech at all, really. So trust is essential for society. Society doesn't work with trust. It doesn't work without trust. And the fact that we don't even notice it, that when I outline all of those trusts that I'm doing this afternoon, it's not stuff you've thought about. That's a measure of how deep it is in our society that we don't even think about it. And tech has its own trusts, right? We're trusting the platform I'm speaking on. I'm trusting the operating system or in this phone and all the software and all the internet. I mean, all of these companies and people and organizations. So there's no way around that. None. Zero. You cannot engineer trust out of a system. You just change it. Because if I engineer trust out, I'm trusting the engineers who did the engineering. So I just moved the trust from one group to another. I haven't actually changed it. And that's okay, right? We humans are good at trust. We have built civilizations around trust. Right? It is why we're better than any other primate on the planet, that we can trust outside of our family groups. Right? That was a huge evolutionary advantage, and we're the only species that can pull that off. So hooray for us. Yeah, so there's a talk about military juntas' control of telecoms and the internet. I don't do a lot of work in this. Access Now is the company, is the NGO, the organization to look at here. They do a lot of work looking at different countries, telecommunications, and human rights. They look at internet outages, countries that turn the internet off, surveillance, censorship. And yes, I mean, this has been a problem, not new. I mean, since the advent of telcos. that in countries where the telco was like run by the brother of the military leader of the country, you had a whole lot of government control over access to communications and access to information. So that's not changing. I think it's definitely something we need to fix, and groups like Access Now are working on that. But yeah, we are still seeing today, countries turning off the internet during times of political unrest so that people can't organize, people can't communicate. So it is still a political tool being wielded. We're still seeing people being surveilled and arrested based on what they're doing on the internet or based on being location tracked with their phones. So yes, these things are actually still really big problems around the world. There's a question about the United States. Incoming Republican Congress looking to expose and root out political manipulation by the intelligence community. I don't think there is any, so there's nothing to do there. But I think there's a lot of work we can do on regulating tech platforms. That tech platforms have largely been able to exist with impunity, which was fine when they didn't matter, but now when they are effectively the public sphere, when they are the place people go for information, where people have conversations, that some regulation is required. And lots of people are looking at this, whether making them like regulated monopolies in the classic sense, forcing them to be transparent about what they're doing. I think one of the problems we have is how opaque they are, and really how little they do to take down misinformation, propaganda, foreign manipulation, because it's not really in the financial best interest. That these manipulators pay, and companies like Facebook get a lot of money from them. So that they'll do some things, and I think they do kind of a mediocre job, but I think that's kind of by design. That they could be spending a lot more money, and they don't. Even something as simple as fake ads. I mean, ads slip through. Facebook has rules about ads and ads that are illegal, ads for cryptocurrencies or scams, don't get approved. And there's tricks called ad cloaking, where an advertiser will get an innocent ad approved, but show the users an ad that violates Facebook's terms of service. Facebook could do more to prevent those, but it would not be profitable. And here's where regulation steps in. It is not some rule that Facebook must be profitable at its current way of operating. We can decide if we want rules about verification or fact checking or authentication or whatever we might want. And then we have to force companies to follow them. So I think there's a lot to be done here. I mean, the notion that Twitter's silencing right-wing voices is kind of nonsense, and all the studies have shown that actually isn't right. But there is a lot of room to regulate big tech. Actually, President Biden had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, I think today or yesterday, where he said, look, Republicans and Democrats can get behind some regulation here. And I think he has a point. We'll see. I mean, this is the United States, and Republicans and Democrats can't get together behind anything just because, but maybe there's common ground that can be found here. We'll see. So the question was about updating IoT devices by throwing them away and buying a new one. Yes, that's bad for the environment, and we don't want it to happen with cars, because that would be a disaster for the environment. Now, what's the solution? It's going to have to be some sort of government oversight, because the reason these things are designed as throwaways is because that's the cheapest. Right? It's cheaper to make them so they break after a couple of years. And whether it's because of the software or the hardware, right, we're stuck with a lot of low-quality objects that end up in landfills. So you can imagine some kind of government rule about software updates for some number of years, or putting the software in escrow somewhere. If the company goes out of business, a third party can take over updates. There's a lot of details here, but here again, is the collision of short-term corporate profits with long-term societal needs. And the way you reconcile those two is through government. There's really no other way. How do independent experts better educate governments in the face and volume and power of corporate lobbying? It is hard, especially in the United States. In the United States, money fuels elections, and to a degree that isn't true in most other places on the planet. So as long as money drives politics, lobbying, which is not just, advocating, it's paying, right? It's contributions. As long as that dominates US politics, it's very hard for independent experts to have a say. It's not impossible, we do it, but it's a lot of work because you're not bringing money to the table. So, the real solution here is to get money out of politics. That is, of course, much harder than it sounds, because money is so endemic in politics that any attempt to remove it, will be fought with money. And we saw the United States with Citizens United. But that's the way to think of it. That it is really a matter of incentives on the part of lawmakers. In the United States, the incentives are very financial. Okay, how can we speed up regulation? This is a complication. This is a complicated question. The basic problem is that regulation doesn't move at the speed of tech, right? That tech moves faster, and that we, at least in the United States, live in a rights-based society. So anything that is not prohibited is allowed. That could be contrasted with a permissions-based society, which basically says anything allowed must be explicitly permitted, right? So there'll always be a gray area, and the question is, the gray area is presumed to be okay or presumed to be not okay. The United States is presumed to be okay. So that basically means that these gray areas will be filled by the fastest mover, and that is the tech companies, that are corporations. So if you look at Uber, right, or Airbnb, all these companies that are moving into these gray areas of regulation and suddenly doing a bunch of things. Drone manufacturers in the beginning, there weren't really any regulations, they just did stuff. Fixing this is hard because the regulation naturally works slower. The place in the United States where you could have agile regulation are the regulatory bodies. So not the legislators, not even the courts, but the government agencies that can, in theory, pass rules pretty quickly. They're given broad mandates and they interpret them through rulemaking. So that is probably the piece of the government that has the best chance of operating at the speed of tech. But there's a really important question here on how to build agile government. Now, this is not something I study. There are people who are doing research here, and there are ideas here. But I haven't seen anything killer. I haven't seen anything that is, here's how you do it. But this feels like a very important problem to solve long term, right? How do we have society move at the speed of the companies so we're not always playing catch up? So we're not always trying to fix what has been broken. Do I think AI needs more literacy among people? It's interesting, right? AI is half real and half a marketing term. And I'm not sure what AI literacy means. I mean, I think people need more experience interacting with artificial agents, whether it is large language models or decision-making models, in a way that's explicit. And so right now, there's going to be some kind of machine learning model that will make a loan decision for you, or maybe how you access government services or some medical decisions, but they're largely opaque and you don't know they're happening, right? And just a little more transparency, I think, will go a long way to letting people know what's actually happening, and that feels important. All right, we are at the end of time. I am Wow, last question, is the AICOA dead? I don't even know what it is, so I can't even answer that question. And with that, I'm gonna sign off. I have to get to the airport and fly somewhere. So thank you. Thanks for listening to my talk. Thanks for coming to the Q&A. I hope this kind of thing happens in person because I'd like to go, although I teach now, so it's complicated. But thanks for thinking about these issues. This is really important stuff, and it's good that there are people who are paying attention here. So thank you.